Alright, so today I want to cover a really controversial topic, and that is feeding live rodents to your ball pythons. And let me tell you, there are some pretty serious dangers when you're feeding live to your ball pythons. You may or may not be aware of it. And when I first started breeding ball pythons, I'd say about 5 or 6 years ago, I started with frozen thawed. And let me tell you, frozen thawed is a lot of work. Essentially, you take the frozen rodents out of the freezer, you warm them up at room temperature, and then you put them under a heat lamp to warm them up, and you feed them to your snakes. And the problem is not all the snakes would eat all the time, so I'd end up with all these frozen rodents that were thawed, and you really can't refreeze them after they thaw once. So essentially you throw them out, which is a huge waste of rodents. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of people that get like a big monitor lizard or a little crocodile or something to eat all the leftover rodents from feeding, which I think is a pretty interesting way to minimize the waste. And then from there, I kind of went to this rotation plan where I'd feed half my snakes early in the week and then the other half later in the week. And that way, if a group of snakes didn't eat, I could double feed the other group. And sometimes I'd have snakes that would eat like 2 or 3, and then my waste almost went down to 0 at that point, which is pretty nice. And then from there, I pretty much started breeding my own rodents. And let me tell you, I have an incredible amount. I have 2 racks of rodents, and I have so many rodents coming out of these racks. It's pretty amazing. And it pretty much solved my problem as far as buying rodents. And I started out doing like a fresh kill. I'd euthanize with CO2 and feed them that way. And I was having a lot better success. It seemed like it was easier because it was only a couple minutes of CO2. And then I could feed immediately. I wouldn't have to wait for hours and kind of plan it with my weekend schedule and everything. It was a lot easier. And then after I started breeding ball pythons for a couple years, I heard about feeding live. And I was kind of playing around, experimenting a little bit, and I took a bunch of live rats, threw them in the snake tubs, and I couldn't believe, I went from like 50% of my ball pythons eating to almost 100% across the board. It was just amazing. And I was like, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm just gonna feed live forever, and it's a lot of people only always feed live, which is pretty interesting. And then I'd say about 6 months later, I had my first injury where the snake actually bit into the side of a ball python, and it was one of my really nice ball pythons that I was trying to sell at the shows, and unfortunately I was selling at the shows with this big huge gash in it. I was telling people, yeah, that was from a rat. It was unfortunate. It was bad for the snake, and then I felt really bad that the snake actually got injured. And then I started doing a lot more research about some of the tragedies from feeding live. A lot of people were saying that they've tried to feed live, and the rat actually would like bite the eye out of the snake, or they put the rat in with the snake and leave it overnight, and the rat would just tear up the snake to where it actually would kill the snake. And some people were like, traumatized from the rat actually killing the snake. And that is once I started hearing those stories, I was like, all right, I'm going back to never feeding live ever again. And then it's pretty much shortly after that, I started breeding and producing hundreds of hatchling ball pythons. And then at that point, I realized that, hey, these hatchlings, they won't eat anything except live mouse hoppers. There's essentially, I tried everything. I tried frozen thawed. I even tried live rat pups. That didn't work. They do not want live rat pups. The only thing they want is a live mouse hopper, and I tend to use just a little bit smaller than a hopper to feed my ball pythons. As a matter of fact, I have some hatchlings now that just shed out, and for the first time, I'm going to feed them some of these live mouse hoppers. But I would say that is probably one of the biggest exceptions to the rule as far as feeding live. You absolutely have to, in my opinion, for at least I'd say probably the first 6 or 7 meals have to be live mice for some of these ball python hatchlings. I'd say for most of the ball python hatchlings. As a matter of fact, I've seen a lot of these big chain pet stores where they'll bring in these little tiny hatchling ball pythons. I think they haven't had enough meals, and they get skinnier and skinnier and skinnier, and sometimes they'll die. And the stores have a policy of absolutely no live feeding at all. And what I think they should do, I think they should change their policy not to feed live, but to only buy ball python hatchlings over a certain weight, say maybe 400 grams or so, 300 to 400 grams. And at that point, they're definitely big enough to eat just about anything. They go through kind of this growth spurt, and then once they transition out of live and go over to frozen thawed, they'll eat anything you can throw. You can put your finger in there and they'll try to eat it, and they kind of go through this really aggressive eating stage. They get really snappy until they hit about the 1,000-gram wall, and then you really can't, it doesn't matter if you're feeding live or you definitely don't want to assist feed. You just kind of have to wait out their fast at that point. But yeah, the other thing is, I do have a couple snakes that will refuse anything except live. So I have, I don't know, maybe 50 breeder ball pythons, and out of those 50, I have 3 that absolutely refuse to eat anything but live, which is kind of unfortunate. And they'll fast for months and months. I've had them go for 8 months, and I'm feeding them week after week, mice, frozen thawed, fresh killed mice and rats and everything, even an African soft fur, and they will absolutely refuse to eat. And then I pop a live rat in there, and bam, it eats it right away. And I'm like, this is unbelievable. I just can't believe that some of these snakes, no matter what you do, will only eat a live rat. And some of them kind of get stuck and left behind where that's all you can do to feed. And I would say if you're feeding live and you absolutely have to feed where you're giving them a decent sized rat that can potentially hurt the snake, I would say no longer than 5 minutes, keep the rat in the tub and then check on them, make sure that there's nothing going on. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually take like a tong or something to make sure if they grab them wrong, to kind of keep the head of the rat away from the snake, especially the teeth. You don't want the teeth biting into and sometimes you can just kind of move it away with the tongs. And that is, I would say, that's kind of the exception to the rule. I'd say most of my ball pythons can actually be trained to eat a frozen thawed or a fresh kill. But I just thought I'd kind of lay it all out on the line for you. This, some people are like, I would never buy from a breeder that's, feeds live, and sometimes it's an absolute necessity. And a lot of times if you're feeding really small hatchlings, or if you're buying a small hatchling, and especially if it's only had a few meals and it refuses to eat, you may want to try a live mouse hopper, because it's pretty much the only thing that I found that the ball python hatchlings will eat. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my collection of ball pythons, and I'm going to show you just the few snakes that absolutely need to eat live and they won't eat anything else. And it's just a few, I would say. Actually, I have quite a few hatchlings that are getting pretty big, and I kind of go through and I'll show you what I feed live to, and everything else I feed a frozen thawed or a fresh kill. All right, so I have my hatchling ball pythons over here that have just hatched out this year. I just did a quick count and I have 23. It's funny, they come out so fast that I don't even know how many I have half the time, because every week I keep adding some more to this. I have probably about 50 more hatchlings that I'm going to actually add to this and another rack. But if you look at this one, this is actually the youngest one on the bottom. I put the oldest ones up at top and just kind of put them, further and further down, so I know which ones are older, which ones are younger. And then this one, actually you can see right here, it shed for the very first time. So as soon as they shed, and they haven't eaten at all, essentially what I'll do is I'll take this water bowl and I'll dump it and I'll fill it with substrate, so if I feed a little live mouse, it won't drown in the water. And then I'll just close it up. A lot of times I'll just close it up for like, usually on these hatchlings I'll do maybe half hour, 45 minutes to let them. Sometimes if it's a really tiny, small, like a crawler mouse, I'll leave it in there overnight, and it's usually not a problem at all. And if you use like a little rat for some of the bigger ones, and it's got its eyes closed. Sometimes you can leave those overnight. Let me tell you, if I have a snake that's like biting and snapping and trying to eat, I've seen people with, you know, like baby reticulated pythons. They open up the tub and that thing comes flying out trying to eat something. I would definitely not feed live unless I absolutely had to. You know, in that case, if you have a really aggressive feeder, why even take the risk? You know, I would only feed live if you absolutely have to. And this one is a really cool snake. Take a look at this. This is a Super Blast Het Desert Ghost. So it's super pastel, pinstripe, 100% Het Desert Ghost. This is one of my holdbacks. I'm going to hold back and get that into my Desert Ghost project. Really cool looking snake. So essentially what I'm doing with these today is I'm actually going to take all these, dump all the waters, fill them with the coconut husk substrate, and then put mice in there. And you can see some of these, like this one already ate 6 rodents. So you can see how beefy they look after 6 rodents. They are really starting to get some size to it, and usually at this point between 6 and 10 is when I start transitioning over to like a fresh killed or frozen thawed mouse. And I'll definitely go, you know, transition away from feeding live as much as I can. And these are, I have a whole bunch of really cool snakes in here, and since they all shed, they are really looking stunning. Take a look at this beauty. That is amazing. This is a lesser scaleless head. So you breed 2 scaleless heads together and you get a completely scaleless ball python, which is pretty cool. You can see it has just a few scales missing from the top of the head. And that is my other holdback that I want to hold back for my scaleless project. All these other ones, I'll pretty much sell most of the other ones. These bamboos, actually, they shed a couple weeks ago, and you can tell even after, this has been about 3 weeks without any food at all, and they shed. I'm not worried about these guys, probably for a couple months if they don't eat. It's not a problem at all with ball pythons. So I'm going to feed these guys one more time and see if they eat. And essentially what I'll do is I'll just keep offering every week, doing the live until we get like 2 months down the road. And normally what happens is, you know, once they eat 6 rodents, I'll go through and start offering like a frozen thawed. And then if I get all the way down, usually what happens is I get down to the bottom of the rack and all of them have eaten like 3 or 4 times. And then there'll be like one that hasn't eaten at all for the whole time. And then I go back and assist feed those and kind of spend some special attention. You have to put the like a frozen thawed or fresh killed rodent in the mouth and assist feed, which is kind of a pain. So out of all these snakes over here in this rack, these are all ball pythons. I have 2 that will absolutely not eat anything except live, and one of them is this guy right here. And this one I have never, actually since I've had it, I think I've had this girl for maybe 2 years, and I just cannot get her to eat anything except alive. I've tried frozen thawed and on and on. The funny thing is she is really snappy. You can tell she's kind of keen on the camera, and if we just sit here long enough, she'll take a bite at the camera, which I don't really want her to do. And I think that's one of the other reasons that some of these snakes don't really take a frozen thawed, because essentially what you're doing is if you put like a rodent there, what they're really looking at, instead of looking at the rodent, they are looking at you and being, some people say defensive, but I think this snake is aggressive. This one will lunge out and snap at you. So you really have to watch this one. This is kind of my special case ball python here. And then I have another one. This one, I don't know, sometimes I'll feed it a mouse, sometimes a rat, but this one will almost never eat fresh killed or frozen thawed. And the funny thing about this one is not aggressive at all. None of my snakes are really aggressive except the one I just showed you, and that thing is a terror, let me tell you. And for some reason, she got a little bit scared here, but no. Well, she's not in a good mood. I think it's from the lights. But usually this girl, you know, I can have her around my neck and she's never snapped at me. She's really docile, really well-mannered. And for some reason, I don't think she's afraid of me like this one, to where it's the fear factor kind of keeping her from eating. I think she just prefers live. She won't eat a frozen thawed no matter what. It's pretty crazy. All right, so over here in this rack, this is my female breeder ball pythons up on the top, and then on the bottom I have my super dwarf free tick in the middle. But these ball pythons, I'd say most of the time they will eat a fresh kill or a frozen thawed. This one in particular has been really picky. For some reason, she will only eat mice. She's a mouser. I actually fed her a live rat just, I think it's been about 2 or 3 weeks, and she actually ate it. I actually fed her a live rat once before last year. She ate it and regurgitated it, which I thought was kind of interesting. This time she actually ate it, didn't throw it up, which is pretty fortunate. And this is actually the first time she's ever eaten a rat. It was when I fed her alive. She's usually only a mouser. And you can see she actually I bred her once and she laid eggs, but I'm not sure if I'll ever get her up to size because she is, you know, just really skinny. And with just feeding mice, you really can't get them up to weight that easy. And I don't know where she's going, girl. And this is essentially just a plain spider. It's got the jungle woma, which kind of reduces the pattern and brightens it a little bit. But that is a really cool snake. And then I have my pastel calico down here. This one, I'd say I've fed live to a couple times. She's been mostly back on like a fresh kill rodent, which is really nice. If you can get them away from live, that's really what you want. And when I first started, she went on a really, really long fast, and I finally broke the fast. I think it was like 8 or 9 months. And I broke it with a live rat, a really small live rat. And when I do live rats with these, it's usually definitely smaller. I'd say it's, she's kind of in feeding mode. I don't want to get my hand too close to her because I think she'll take a bite. But I would say it's definitely skinnier than the thickest part of her body. I'd say a smaller rat, one that she can really kind of get a handle on, where you're not really concerned about the rat winning in a fight against the snake. All right, so I pretty much decided my policy for feeding live is only if I feel it's absolutely essential to feed live rodents to my ball pythons. As a matter of fact, if I open up a tub and they come flying out and they're looking for something to eat, I'll definitely not feed live. It's definitely safer to feed a fresh killed or frozen thawed. And I've actually had a snake go for 1.5 years without eating. As a matter of fact, if you look at Bobby here, he's a full-size, full-grown adult male. He's got a really good body condition. This snake could probably go 2 years without eating a single meal. It's pretty amazing how long they can go and still be in pretty good shape after 2 years. This girl didn't eat for 1.5 years, and I was starting to get worried about her. She's looking really skinny, but it wasn't like her spine was sticking out or anything. She still had some pretty good body condition. And then I broke her fast by offering a live rat, and she actually ate it. I couldn't believe it. And then I went back to the fresh killed that I was feeding before, and she just kept eating them after that, and just kind of one live feeding snapped her out of it, and we went right back to our routine, which is pretty cool. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.